Hello and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we're reviewing All Quiet on the Western Front. War breaks out in Germany in 1914. Paul Bäumer and his classmates quickly enlist in the army to serve their fatherland. No sooner are they drafted than the first images from the battlefield show them the reality of war. All Quiet on the Western Front is directed by Edward Berger. All right, so Jeffrey, what did you think about All Quiet on the Western Front?
So I want to pose a kind of question to you, or start in this particular place. So Jean-Luc Godard has this famous quote about war films where he says, and I'm paraphrasing, all films are pro-war because you can't make a film be anti-war. One way or another, you're always going to glorify or glamorize what war looks like because it's an ugly, nasty thing. If that quote is true, I don't necessarily agree with that quote, but let's go on the pretense that that quote is true. This film gets as close to anti-war as I think you could possibly get within the context of that quote.
Agreed.
What I like so much about this film, there's a lot to like about it, especially from a formal angle, because the film is really technically beautifully made. Every opportunity it has to make you feel really bad about something, it takes that opportunity, and it is absolutely relentless in what it shows you. It shows the cruelty of humanity, it shows the absolute barbarism of war. Even some of the more praised war films of the past couple of years, even take 1917 for instance, is a film that is really cool. Some of the things they go through are harrowing, but it's shot beautifully, there are explosions. There's this real fist-raising moment at the end when he's running across the battlefield. This film is showing the utter hopelessness and utter pointlessness of all of this destruction.
The point is so well made of how terrible and barbaric war is that when you see these scenes, you're not rooting for them as characters, you're just trying to hope for their survival, but you know they're gonna die. I think this movie also achieves very well its understanding of class. So you see scenes that are taking place in the battlefield, and then you see scenes that are taking place in the chateaus that have been taken over by the German generals, or the German generals that are trying to get this armistice across on their luxury train liner. There is such a difference in the way these people are eating. The availability of food is a very specific point in this movie.
They have to steal eggs and a goose at different points.
At the same time, you're seeing these clips of the generals having like a 5-course meal on the luxury train liner and in the chateau, which is literally right by the front.
Their gold teacups.
With their gold teacups, yeah.
The film is really beautifully shot. And we were talking about the barbarism and the remorseless violence of war, right? Sometimes it will show a battle scene and juxtapose it against these beautiful scenes of nature, almost like we're there to destroy everything that was put here that's so beautiful. There's a great scene at the beginning. I believe it's like a den of foxes. Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. And you know, not even a couple minutes later, there was a bunch of men being blown up on the battlefield. The film does a really good job of juxtaposing those things and just showing you how unnatural of a thing war really is.
It's such a sad scene that takes place when they're pushing the front line again before this armistice takes place, and he ends up coming across this Frenchman. He stabs him a bunch of times, and then he almost regrets his decision because the man is dying there in front of him. That scene so wonderfully encapsulated everything that was happening up until that point. I also want to talk about how this movie was bookended, because the movie starts with the scene that follows a bunch of soldiers pushing this front line and all of them die. At that point, I'm about 30 minutes into the movie and I'm thinking, oh, is this how it's going to be? That it's not going to focus on any particular characters and it's just going to be this repetitive process in a sense. When the movie gets into its jive and actually introduce characters that you learn more about, you see a little bit of the illusions of them coming in and what they expect war to be like and having that broken down over time. And then the movie ends with almost a book ending of how it began, with this younger kid who was sent to the front line because Germany is running out of soldiers, they're running out of men, so the kids that are sending are younger and younger and younger. At the end of the movie, he's picking off the dog tags, but you snap them and you take one half and you put it in a bag so they remember who had died. What was it worth? Because in the end, the kid was just doing the same thing, and he's even younger than the previous person before him. It just seems so worthless. It's crazy of a movie for pointing out all these things at once and making something that seems so meaningless so meaningful.
That scene in the trenches is really interesting because it's one of the first times our main character sees the humanity of his enemy. One of the things that's most important from a general perspective, like a governing perspective in war, is dehumanizing the enemy. So one of the most famous examples of this, or one of the examples I know of, in World War II, they would spread lies about what Japanese soldiers were like that they would sleep in trees, because it would make you think that they were dehumanized, like that they were animals, right?
Yeah.
And it's a lot easier to kill something that doesn't have humanity. But up close and personal, you start to see their humanity. It becomes a lot more difficult to kill them. This film just has some terrific imagery. I know we talked about the fox before, but some of these landscapes in the forest, a lot of the production design, it has this muddy, grueling, nasty production design. It wants you to feel every bit of mud, every bit of dirty water that these guys are rolling around in. It's really well made.
Yeah, I did not feel during this movie that the gruesomeness was overdone. Like they were focusing too much on it. I felt like in this case it was almost necessary. There's been a lot of war movies where I saw that, I'm like, was that necessary? Did they need to show that?
Yeah.
In this case, I felt like it was necessary.
It almost feels like an overcorrection of the way war films were 10 to 20 years ago. They had this air of the soldiers have a lot of honor and there's a lot of valor and we have to do this thing even though it's so hard and war is hell. And this film has a much more nihilistic view, I think, of all of that. And I think aptly so. A lot of its violence, again, is meant to disgust you, and war should disgust you.
All right, so you ready to go to grades?
Yeah, I give this film an A-. I think it's just beautifully made. I think it's very intelligently made. I'd almost accuse it of bludgeoning its audience with its message if it wasn't so artfully composed. But every beat of this film makes you feel something, you know? And it's actually another film, we've been talking about this way too much, but it's another film that's about 2 hours and 30 minutes long. And it's relentlessly paced that I didn't feel a lot of it as bad as I felt for most of its runtime. It's very tense and it's very disturbing. And I can never say that, aside from maybe the last half hour that goes on a bit too long, I could never say that I was bored. I always felt very in tune with its message.
I completely agree. I give this movie an A- as well. Right there on the same page with you. And I totally agree with everything you said. I think the way that it was shot was brilliant. We didn't talk about this enough, or really at all, but the acting in this movie is absolutely fantastic. You see the impression that it almost feels like they've experienced it in a way, which is very hard to get across in a war movie with acting, I think, because you're seeing such gruesome things. It's like, how does a facial expression look from seeing something so gruesome? And a lot of this movie is looks.
Yeah.
And I think that pit scene that's happening between the two, he doesn't have much to say, but you could see the wheels turning in his head.
Yeah.
I think that's the case with a lot of this movie, and he did fantastic in this movie with that.
I didn't say this earlier. The film does a very good job of establishing the friendships between the people that are in this particular regiment, to the point that it feels like utter tragedy when any of them are killed in combat. Another emotive aspect of the film that I just really liked.
Oh, going on top of that, that reminds me. You were talking briefly about how they make the other side seem like
Inhuman.
Yeah. Going back to the whole class thing I was talking about earlier, it almost felt like the generals didn't really care about the soldiers of their own side. They had to treat them as inhuman to be able to just utilize and throw their lives away for the case of winning a war. Like that one general, he was like, I have been in so many wars, I have never once lost a battle. And this egotism is driving him to put all his men at risk and push the line, even though this armistice is going down in like 30 minutes. And it's like, we're just gonna do this. From a class perspective, how he had to treat them as pretty much nothing while he sat in his chateau and just risked all these men's lives.
Do you have some contempt for the rich or anything?
Oh, in this movie for sure, yeah. All right, and that's it for our review of All Quiet on the Western Front. All Quiet on the Western Front is now streaming on Netflix, so if you have not seen it, go check it out. If you have, let us know in the comments, what did you think about this film? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.